The message came on an ordinary afternoon, no greeting, no concern, just a sentence telling me not to expect anything from him when I got old because he had his own life and family now. I sat there staring at the screen, realizing this wasn't anger or cruelty, but something colder, finality. I thought about every year I'd put his needs before mine, every sacrifice that felt invisible once it was done. I didn't reply right away, because before answering him, I had to decide whether I was still asking for love, or finally choosing self-respect. The message arrived on a quiet afternoon, the kind where time moves slowly and nothing feels urgent, which made the words hit even harder when I read them. There was no hello, no explanation, just a blunt reminder that I shouldn't expect my son to take care of me in old age because he had his own life and family now. I read it once, then again, not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to be sure this was really how he wanted to say it. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat there for a long time, listening to the ticking clock, thinking about how final his words sounded, as if a door had quietly closed without warning. I wasn't angry at first. I was tired in a way that settled deep in my chest, the kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing something you assumed would always exist might never have been real. I remembered the years after his father died, how I worked 2 jobs, one during the day and one cleaning offices at night, so he could stay in the same school and not feel different from other children. I remembered pretending I wasn't hungry so he could have seconds, pretending I wasn't scared when bills piled up, pretending I was strong enough for both of us. I never told him those things because love wasn't something I kept score of. I believed, maybe foolishly, that care returned itself naturally over time. As he grew older, his world expanded and mine quietly shrank. When he married, I stepped back willingly, telling myself that independence was healthy, that not interfering was a form of respect. I visited when invited, helped when asked, and kept my worries to myself. Aging crept in slowly, the stiffness in the mornings, the doctor appointments I didn't mention, the way I started planning errands around my energy instead of the clock. I never expected him to give up his life for me, but I thought there would be room for concern, for conversation, for reassurance that I wasn't alone in facing what comes next. His message stripped away that illusion. It wasn't cruel, just efficient, as if he were managing expectations the way one manages a schedule. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering when dependence became such a frightening word, when needing someone became something to apologize for. I thought about my own parents, how they'd lived with us during their final years, not because they were helpless, but because being together felt natural. Times had changed, I knew that, but the loneliness that realization brought felt heavier than I'd expected. The next day, I went through my routine as usual, grocery shopping, folding laundry, watering the plants, but everything felt slightly off, like the ground beneath me had shifted. I found myself standing in front of an old photo album, flipping through pages of birthdays, graduations, quiet moments that once felt like promises of continuity. I wondered if my son remembered those days the same way I did, or if they'd faded into something distant and irrelevant. By evening, I opened the drawer where I kept important documents, not with a clear plan, but with a growing sense that I needed to look at my life honestly, without assumptions. Inside were papers I'd prepared years ago, insurance information, savings details, notes I'd made after watching friends struggle when they'd relied too heavily on children who weren't prepared or willing. I realized then that part of my pain came from recognizing I'd been waiting for reassurance instead of building certainty. His message hadn't created my vulnerability, it had exposed it. Sitting there, surrounded by quiet, I understood that my reply couldn't be emotional or defensive. It needed to come from a place of clarity. Before I answered him, I had to decide whether I was responding as a mother asking for care, or as a woman acknowledging that her future was still her own responsibility. And as that thought settled in, I felt the first stirrings of something unexpected, not bitterness, but resolve, and I knew whatever I wrote back would change the shape of our relationship in ways neither of us had fully anticipated. I didn't reply to my son right away. Instead, I let a few days pass, not to punish him, but to hear my own thoughts clearly without his words echoing over them. During that time, I met with a financial counselor, updated documents I'd neglected, and asked questions I'd been avoiding because part of me hoped I wouldn't need the answers. There was something grounding about facing facts directly, about replacing assumptions with plans. When I finally sat down to write back, my hands were steady. I told him I understood his desire to live his own life, that I had never wanted to be a burden, and that I was taking steps to ensure my future was secure. I didn't accuse him. I didn't remind him of sacrifices. I simply stated that I would respect his boundaries, and expected him to respect mine as well. His response came hours later, shorter, less certain. He said he hadn't meant to sound harsh, that he was overwhelmed, that he didn't know how to talk about aging and responsibility. We met for coffee the following week, something we hadn't done in a long time without a specific reason. Sitting across from him, I noticed how tired he looked, how much pressure he carried silently, the same way I once had. We talked honestly, not about who owed what, but about fear, about the unspoken expectations that pass from one generation to the next. I told him I wasn't asking for promises, only for honesty and presence when possible. He admitted he'd sent the message out of panic, worried about failing both his family and me. The conversation didn't erase the hurt, but it softened it, turning something sharp into something manageable. Over the following months, I focused on building a life that didn't revolve around waiting. I downsized to a smaller place closer to public transport, joined a local walking group, and reconnected with friends I'd neglected while centering my world around my child. Independence, I learned, wasn't a rejection of love, but a way of protecting it from resentment. My son checked in more often, not out of obligation, but because our relationship no longer felt like a looming responsibility. We shared updates, not expectations. There were still moments of sadness, especially when I saw families who seemed effortlessly intertwined, but I reminded myself that every relationship has its own shape, and comparison only breeds quiet bitterness. One evening, months after that initial message, my son thanked me for not reacting with anger. He said my response had forced him to confront fears he didn't know how to name. I told him growth rarely comes from comfort, and that learning to stand on my own had given me a sense of peace I hadn't known I was missing. As time passed, the fear that had once settled in my chest eased. I stopped measuring my worth by how needed I was and started measuring it by how grounded I felt. Aging no longer seemed like a slow loss, but a narrowing of focus, a chance to choose what truly mattered. When I look back at that message now, it no longer feels like rejection, but like an uncomfortable turning point that pushed me toward a more honest life. I'm still his mother, and he's still my son, but our bond is no longer built on silent expectations. It's built on respect, boundaries, and the understanding that love doesn't always mean carrying someone else's future on your shoulders. Sometimes, it means trusting them to carry their own, and giving yourself permission to do the same.